My name is Nan Onkka and I am here at the Grand Marais Art Colony to bring you the third and final lesson in our winter watercolor series. So this month we are going to be creating some winter birches with some shadows and maybe the moon, or you could put the sun in the background. And I have a few examples for you. These ones, this one. And we're gonna create these with some of the same techniques that we have been learning, the wet on wet technique and the wet on dry technique. But this month, we're gonna add a new fun ingredient, salt. So in your packets, or your art kits, you should have received a couple packets of salt like this. If you don't have that for whatever reason, or if you run out, you can also just use regular table salt or whatever kind of salt you have at home. But we will be using salt this month. So as always, before we start, we need a clean area to make our artwork. So make sure it's an area that is easy to clean up if anything spills, and if there's no electronics or books or anything that could get wet. You are going to need two pieces of paper. One can be just a scratch piece of paper. That can be anything. It can have stuff on the back, whatever. The other one should be your piece of watercolor paper. I have cut mine in half just so that it's a little faster to show you my demonstration, but you can keep it as a big full sheet or cut it in half if you want. So two pieces of paper. You're also going to need your watercolor kit with a paintbrush, a clean glass of water to rinse your brush out. Paper towel is important this time, and a pencil, and of course your salt. Okay, so those are the things that you will need to start this project, the winter birch trees. Okay, let's begin. Okay, part one is drawing. So the first thing we're going to do is set your watercolor paper aside and find your scratch piece of paper. Again, it doesn't have to be as clean as this. It doesn't really matter. It's just for practicing our drawing. You can decide if you want your drawing to go this way, kind of like this one and the example that I put in your packet. This time I think I'm gonna make mine go this way so that my trees are vertical. So you can make that decision however you'd like, okay? So I'm going to do it this way this time. And my first thing with a pencil is to draw my horizon line. So the horizon is where the sky meets the ground. And I would like you to do it somewhere below halfway. So this is as high as it could be, but it'd be nice if it were kind of down here. So I'm gonna do it about right here, okay? And then I'm going to start drawing my trees. And these trees, as you can see, are mostly going to be the tree trunk with just a few branches. They don't even really have to have branches if you don't want to. But the reason I do that is because it'll be a little easier to paint around when we start adding paint. So I'm gonna start by thinking about where the bottoms of my tree trunks are going to go. So I'm gonna put one bottom here. And the lower it is to the bottom of the paper, the wider the tree should be. If it's closer to the horizon line, it can be a little skinnier, okay? So I'm going to draw my tree. I'm just gonna draw two straight lines going up for now. And this one, I'll put two straight lines. And this one, I'll put two straight lines. I'm gonna put this one maybe right here. Okay, so those are the basic tree trunk. Now, if I want to, I can start adding branches. And this is why we're practicing, so that you can kind of figure this out before adding it to your final paper. And I'm going to add, and typically the branches are a little bit thicker where they connect to the tree, and then they get a little thinner as they go up. And I'll try one here. Okay, I'm just gonna do a little tiny branch down there, kind of a broken or new branch, and one up here. Okay, so if I erase these lines, you don't have to do that, but I'm just gonna show you. You start to see what it's going to look like. And it looks pretty good. Okay, so the next thing you can add if you want to, but you don't have to, I have examples of both. So this one doesn't have a sun or a moon in it, nor does this one. But this one I chose to put a moon in it. And the reason I wanted to do that is because then I have a light source. And I could make it look kind of like night, but it would still make sense that there are some shadows with the trees. So for this one, I'm gonna put a full moon back here. And maybe it's going a little behind this tree. So that's my full moon. Okay, so that's going to be my light source for this project. Okay, once you are happy with your drawing, and it might take you a little bit longer than it took me because I've been practicing, then you're going to take your new piece of paper, your watercolor piece of paper, and do the same thing, but this time you can try to do it without the lines that you're going to erase. So I'm gonna start up here and just kind of copy this. And I'm doing it lightly all the way to the bottom, going up. The next one goes up. So I'm just trying to get the same drawing mostly without drawing too dark or the extra lines. If you have to draw those extra lines because it's confusing otherwise, that's totally fine. You just want to erase anything extra before you start painting. Okay, I'm almost done. I need to do that horizon line down here and my moon. Okay, so this is what your watercolor paper should look like at the end of part 1, the drawing section. And we are ready to move on. Part 2 is painting the background. So we can move our sketch out of the way. And what you're going to need is clean water and your watercolor set. And then I like to have a paper towel ready for when I'm painting, just in case. And then the other thing you're going to need is your salt packets. And I'm just gonna tear one of mine open so that it's ready to go when I need it, because we need to act kind of quickly. So just tearing that open and setting it safely so it doesn't spill. Okay, we are going to be doing the wet on wet technique that we talked about in the last couple projects. So like our very first project, our first step is to have clean water and a clean brush. So you can just kind of dab it and make sure that it's clean on your paper towel. And we are gonna take one section at a time of our background, and we're not going to paint the trees, we're just painting the skies. So we're using a technique that helps control the watercolor, because watercolor only spreads in areas that are wet. So if we don't get the trees wet, the paint won't go there. And we're gonna use that to our advantage today. So only painting the background with clear water. And maybe you can see that it's shiny back there, but not on the trees. And then I'm going to mix my colors. So I think I kind of want to do a dark blue. You could mix some pink into there if you want purple, or a little green if you want kind of a greenish background. You can do whatever you want. Now when I paint on the wet paper, it spreads and it has this nice soft kind of look to it, much softer than if I were to paint just on the dry paper. So I'm gonna fill this background with the colors that I want. And I wanna make sure that everything stays wet, okay? It doesn't have to be dripping wet, but the paint should spread nicely and softly. You shouldn't have any hard lines. Just to show you, this is another piece of watercolor paper. This is what it looks like without the wet on wet. So as long as it doesn't look like that with the sharp line, you're doing the right thing. Now I'm gonna take just a little bit of my salt. I can just pour a tiny bit in my hand. So just a tiny bit, because I need to save the rest of my salt. And I'm gonna start sprinkling it right on top of the wet paper. This is called a salt resist, and it will make kind of a cool texture in the background. And I like it because it reminds me of kind of a snowy sky. And the key to doing this salt resist is making sure that the paper is wet when you add the salt, and then you need to just let it sit until it's completely dry. So don't touch it, don't try to move it around, wait until your paper is completely dry. So we're not gonna do anything with the salt until then. So I did that section, now I'm gonna do the next sections, and you can do these little sections together. You don't have to do each one separately. And my brush is just a tiny bit blue, but that's okay because I'm doing a blue background. So I'm gonna get it all wet first and let the paper kind of soak. Just a little bit before I add the pigment, the blue. I'm gonna add my blue, and I'm mixing my two blues. And again, you can mix in other colors too if you want to. You could make like a sunset or a sunrise. Again, you always want that soft brush strokes. Shouldn't look like a hard line, it should look soft. I'm doing these ones, adding those in there. And then I get to add some salt. And it's okay, again, I'm not using that much. It's okay if there are other parts, like if the salt goes on the white parts, or if you want to add a little more salt to another wet area. That's totally fine. You just want to make sure you have salt left for the end of your project. Okay, oh, you can see how that stuff is reacting really cool. So I'm just gonna keep plodding along and do the next section. Starting always with my water, just to help pre-soak, then adding the color. Almost done with this section. Okay, I'm gonna get a little more salt. Okay, and my last little section over here. First, oops, I have something on there. First, and my water is getting progressively more blue. Uh-oh, this is a good example. If I get an area of the tree wet, I need to kind of blot it off with my paper towel. Otherwise, my tree's gonna turn blue in that area. So I don't want that to happen. Anywhere that the paper is wet, the color will spread. So I want to make sure my trees stay white. Add this. And I'm gonna add my last bit of salt. If you run out of salt, you can just use any kind of kitchen salt for cooking. Okay, so there I have the part 2 painting the background. And now I am going to carefully move this aside because it needs to dry. So what I'm going to do is just move it flat. I'm not going to tip it because it might run. And I'm going to set it aside to move on to part 3. Part 3, practicing the details. So we're gonna go back to our sketch for a little bit. We're letting our watercolor dry so that we can paint the next parts. So we're gonna go back to this sketch for a little bit. So we're gonna talk about a light source and a little bit of perspective. So perspective is when you create a depth of space in your artwork, making some things look closer and some things look farther away. So if you kind of followed along with me at the beginning, you probably already have some trees, these ones that look like they're closer to us than this tree back here that looks a little farther away. And so a general rule is that things that are farther away get smaller. So I made this tree a little skinnier and these ones a little chubbier. And they're set back closer to the horizon. So there's two things kind of going for us for making that. The trees look like they have a little bit of depth or perspective. So now we're gonna further that by adding the shadows. And I will show you this example first. So some of you chose to add a light source, the moon or maybe a sun in your background, and some of you didn't. So maybe some of you, it's more like this and just plain in the background, and either way is totally okay. If you chose to have a light source, that is where the light is coming from in your drawing, and your shadows should be going away from that light source. So this tree, the light source is here and the shadows are going this way. Same with this one, the light is here and the shadow is going away. So if I drew a line between this and the moon, it would make one straight line or pretty close. So these ones, because they're on the left side of the moon, are kind of tilted to the left a little bit, going away. So I'm thinking about the direction of the shadows in relation to where my light source is. If you have a light source that is maybe on the side, if it's on the right side over here, then all of your shadows will be kind of pointing towards the left. If you don't have a light source, you can just pick a spot. So maybe you pick a spot in the center or on the left or right. Your paper isn't quite dry, or you could pick a little spot right in the middle of your tree and draw a dot that you can erase later. And that can be your kind of light source, okay? So once we have our light source, then we're gonna start drawing the shadows. And we're gonna draw them on this one to practice, but on our painting, we're gonna be risky and just paint them on so that they look less rigid. So what I'm going to do is take kind of the center of my my moon and have my pencil come out of the bottom of the tree that I'm going to draw the shadow on. So I know in general that the shadow is going to come this direction, okay? So what I can do is put it right along the corner of my tree and see exactly where that line is. So I'm going to remember that line and draw it here. And then I can also do that here. So I'm lining up the dot in the corner, and I'm just kind of remembering where that line is and drawing it there. So I'm gonna do the same over here. The dot in the corner, have the line come down. The dot in the corner, and the line coming down. If this is kind of confusing to you, you could line up the dot in the corner and draw, let me do it with a different, I'm gonna do it with this piece of paper. Dot in the corner, and I could even just draw the whole line down, okay? So that I kind of know what I'm doing. Then you can erase this part. Okay, there's lots of ways to do this, and this is just our practice. So try and check with someone after you've done it to see if you've done it right. It doesn't have to be exact, but I'm connecting the dot. Oops. Oh boy. The dot in the corner, okay? So I have, a ruler would be very helpful in this situation, but I don't have one with me right now. And a dot in the corner, and I'll draw just this part down here, okay? So I'll erase my guidelines. Now I know where my shadows are gonna go. They're gonna go in these spots. You don't have to shade this in unless it's helpful to you, okay? The next part we're gonna practice is adding the details to the birch bark. So birch trees have these dark lines and sometimes spots on their bark called lenticels. And these, from a distance, they look just kind of like short black lines. And I like to kind of group them in little groups because I think that looks nice, but you're welcome to do it however you would like. So we're gonna add these, and I just want you to practice to kind of see what it looks like. So I'm going to start drawing some of them. And again, I said I like to draw them in groups of 3 or 4. I am kind of avoiding drawing any right where the horizon line would be, just because that looks a little confusing. But otherwise, you can kind of draw them anywhere. When they start going up the branches, they turn a little bit in the direction of the branch. So I'm just gonna keep going on these. And they can't be very small or very detailed because we're going to be painting them, which paintbrushes are a little harder to get detail with than pencil. So again, I'm kind of avoiding this line right here because that is gonna look a little confusing. The other thing that you could add is what I call a birch eye. And that's a spot where it kind of looks like an eyeball or an eye. And that's a spot where a branch was growing or could grow. And so you could add those to the birch eye. So maybe I'll add another one right here if you want. Okay, so I am gonna keep working on this until I'm happy with it. Again, this is just my practice, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but I want to have a good guide for when I move on to my next step. Before we move on to the next step, you do want, well, it's kind of cool. You can start to see how the salt is reacting. It's not done reacting because it's still a little wet. You can tell because it's shiny. So I'm going to let this dry a little bit longer. In the meantime, what you can do is go get clean water and rinse out your brush, and then you can start mixing the color for your next part. So I'll start that in part 4. But know that if your paper is really, really wet, you don't quite want to move on. So take a few more minutes or put it in the sun for a few minutes or under a fan or something. It can be just slightly damp, but we don't want it super shiny going on to the next part. Okay, so go fill your water, refill your water, and we will start again with part 4. Part 4, painting the details. So our kind of last step, well, almost last step of our painting is to add the shadows and the lenticels that we added into our sketch. So again, before we do this, we want to make sure that our paper is mostly dry, if not completely dry. The reason we want to do that with the shadows, which we'll start with, it doesn't matter because the shadows aren't touching the background. But when we start adding the lenticels, if we bump into a wet area of our background, then the color is going to spill into that area. So that's what we want to avoid. A good thing to have for this part of the activity is your paper towel close by, so that if you do have a little emergency, you can try to save that part. But let's get going. So what I'm going to do is first decide what color I want my shadows to be. So they could be kind of a darker grayish black. They could be like a soft purple. They could be a blue. It's really up to you what color you want. I think I'm going to do purple for this one. So I need to mix on my palette a little pink into a blue. And I might just add a tiny bit of black to make it a little gray. So that's what I'm going to do, but you can do something different. It's up to you. And I'm going to, without actually drawing on here, I'm gonna look at my practice sketch and just try to kind of imitate that. So now we're doing the wet on dry technique. So wherever you paint, your paint won't really spread into other areas. Should be pretty easy to control. And I forgot to say, one little sneaky trick that makes it look a little more realistic is to add just a slightly darker color closer to the tree, because the shadow is usually darker closer to the object that has the shadow. So that's something you can do. And it works best to do it when the original shadow color is still wet, because it kind of softens in there. Okay, now I'm gonna move on to the next shadow. So I'm looking here, and this one's going the other direction away. And again, I'm gonna do this and add a little bit of a darker color right at the base. And you can see sometime when you're in the sun or under a strong light, you can see your own shadow. It's typically darker wherever you're the closest to it. And it gets lighter as it goes away. I'm just adding a little plain water over there to soften that. Okay, one more shadow. Oops, I started with the wrong color. Start with my purple color. Again, I'm checking to make sure it's going the same direction. It's kind of making a line with my light source. And then I'm gonna add just that little bit of dark kind of underneath. Great. Okay, my shadows are done. So now I'm gonna look at my painting. If you moved across like I did when we painted the background, this part might still be a little wet. I also noticed that areas like the little spots tend to be wet. The first section is probably pretty dry. If it's not, just blow on it or put it in the sun for a couple more minutes. Or you can take another piece of paper and kind of fan it to get it to dry. For this part, I want a pretty dry brush. I don't want it very wet. And I'm going to be using my black, or you could use a dark blue or a dark brown. It's kind of up to you, but I'm just going to keep it simple and do black. And this is when I'm going to add my lenticels. So again, I'm going to avoid putting one across where the horizon line is, just because it's a little confusing. And you don't have to exactly follow your sketch. The other thing I'm kind of avoiding is getting really close, especially if it looks wet on the side, because I don't want my black to run into my blue area. If it does, it's not the end of the world. All you need to do is take a little piece of paper towel and blot it, but there might just be a little blackish area. So again, these don't have to be perfect. They're trees, so everyone is different. No two are the same. And when I go up the branch, I'm just gonna turn it a little bit. Okay, last one. And then I'm almost done with my painting. Okay, oh, I forgot my little birch eye. Doing down here. There. Very cool. My very last step has to happen when it's completely dry. So you can start cleaning up a little bit. All you need for your last step, and you could do this, you know, the next day if you wanted to. It's not going to take very long. But my very last step is to just, and it's actually also optional, you don't have to do it, is to take my black and just very lightly outline my birch trees. Like that. And most of my paper is completely dry, so I think I'll be able to do it, but you want to make sure you don't have any shiny pools of water before you do this. So this area I'm a little worried about. Let's just see what happens. It just softened a little bit into the blue, which is okay for me. If you have like a pool of water, you definitely don't want to paint that part yet. You could just save that part for a little later. But so far mine seems to be pretty dry, just without waiting much more than a few minutes. But it really depends on how warm it is and how much water you put on to start with. So everyone's is going to be a little different for drying time. Okay, so I am done with my painting. I'm gonna let this sit for like a good little while just to make sure it's completely dry. And then afterwards, I can pick it up. I'll just show you this as an example. I can pick it up and brush off all the salt. I've already done that on this one. So there was no salt left, but you can see that the salt makes some patterns in the background and it reminds me of snow. So I thought that was kind of cool for this project. And then once the salt is off, make sure you sign your name and you can put a date so you know when you made it. And that's it. We're done. Nice job. The last bit is to clean up. So make sure that you, when you're finished completely, you rinse out your paintbrush and dump your water out of your cup, and make sure that your paints are dry before you put the lid back on, so you can blot them or you can just leave them open to dry. And wipe down your table with just to clean up any little bits of paint that might be there. Lastly, make sure that your painting dries flat. So if you move it somewhere in your room, make sure you carry it flat like this and don't tip it. Okay, that's it. Before I sign off, I just want to thank you for being here, for watching this video, for creating art with me. It has been so fun and such a joy to make these projects for you and to make them with you. And I really am excited when I hear about them and see examples, and I hope that you are really proud of what you've done. So on behalf of the Grand Marais Art Colony, I just want to say thank you for being here, and I hope to make art with you again soon. Bye!